Hi there, and welcome to my latest YouTube video. Today I'm just giving you a presentation. Hope you enjoy this. It's called ICM. It's more than just a blurry photo. It's a little look at how to elevate your ICM images a little bit more and what makes it more than just a very simple wiggle of the camera. I hope you enjoy it. It's a presentation I gave to the Guild of Photographers at their Photo Hubs event in February. Went down well there. I promised some people who weren't at the event that I'd put it on YouTube. So I hope you enjoy. Please feel free to leave me any comments that you might like. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. Give me a thumbs up. It's always lovely to see people come back again and watch videos. There will be more coming soon. Okay, let's go on and have a look and enjoy. Okay, intentional camera movement, so much more than a blurry photo. I'm going to try and walk you through a little bit of background and then move into the main body of work. I'm just starting a little bit with some basic information. So if you do have a good handle on ICM photography, you may find the first 5 minutes a little bit of a recap. If you're new to it, hopefully it just gives you an idea of some things to get you started. So a little bit, what is ICM photography? So ICM photography is when you make an image and you move the camera intentionally while the shutter is open. You mean to do it, basically. You don't just drop the camera. So many people say, oh, my mum did that, or my kid could do that. You know, you just need to wiggle the camera. Well, yes, but you need to do it deliberately. It's not got to be a happy accident. You can make the move from your hands, your body, any kind of motion, or with the lens itself. So it can be a movement of the camera, or it can be a movement of the lens, like a zoom. It can actually be that you're holding the camera still, but you're moving your body. So as long as the camera is actually physically moving while you're making the image, then that's intentional camera movement. The technique normally uses between about a 5th and 5-second shutter speed. I say normally because every ICM photographer is different. I work normally between about 1/4 of a second and 2 seconds. I know other photographers work up above 5 seconds. Some photographers work at a 30th of a second. So it's very, very dependent on what speed you like and the kind of results you like. But it can be done anywhere between a 30th of a second and 30 seconds. So you've got a massive wide range. In fact, you could go even longer than 30 seconds, depending on what you're trying to do. Just so you know, it's not a new technique, although it's come fairly recently to the fore. I say fairly recently, we're talking sort of in the last 5 or 6 years. There are not reports, but there is, information to suggest that way back in the 1900s, people were already trying this, but with film cameras. I can't imagine how hard it was to do with a film camera, given the amount of images I take with my digital camera to try and create what I make. But anyway, it's not new. It has been around for a while, but it's become quite an interesting creative technique that's been sort of increased in interest just recently. Some more interesting points. It is a creative technique, and that is why I love it. You do need to practice, study, and learn to make ICM images that look like you meant to make the movement and not drop the camera. It's a technique, the same as any other photography technique, and it does require you to practice. You can't forget everything you've learned about technique. So if you remember to bring things like balance, exposure, point of interest, this kind of thing into your images. You can't forget all the things you've learned and just say, oh, I'm doing an ICM image. Ideally, you want to bring ICM in on top of what you've already learned. In my eyes, there is no wrong ICM image, because if what you create is what you're aiming for, then you've won. You've got a correct image for what you wanted. Whether it speaks to someone else, that's a whole other matter. So ICM images that speak to others tend to be compelling for those who are unattached to the image. So we all get very, very attached to our images emotionally, and we can see what we see in them. But to get other people to see that, you need to also create an image that's got a little bit more to it than just hoping that somebody understands what you meant. And I'm going to go through all that today. So it all started around 2016 on a Guild photographers tour to Paris, the Outer Hebrides for me. This is just a little background in case you don't know me very well. And this is me out on the beach, and this is the image that I created while I was stood there. I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with it. I played, as I said, this I made within like a day of actually learning just some real basics of ICM, moving the camera left to right. That was kind of what I thought ICM was about that time, but I just loved the colours and the movement and the lines. These were some images that I created that first week when I learned all about ICM. Well, I say learned all about it. I learned the basics and got started. What I noticed very quickly was that these words below were the feelings that I was getting from ICM. I had freedom. It allowed me creativity. It was unique. It allowed me to put a little bit of myself into the images. I felt it was a little bit more artistic. I had feelings. I was being reactive in my photography. It was exciting, it was fun, and it was new. And I was seeing all that coming into these images. And I still love these. My ICM photography has moved on considerably in the last 6 years, but I still love these images that I created when I first learnt it. So debunking some myths, and these are all things that I've heard said about ICM, horror of horrors. It's for women photographers. Yes, I will agree that a lot of ICM photographers are women, but it is not a technique just for women photographers. It's a creative technique, and maybe that's why it appeals slightly more to female photographers than males. But I still know an awful lot of male ICM photographers, and it's certainly not just for women. It's only for landscape photographers. Now, this is where ICM photography sort of started out for me with landscape, and this is where I was most aware of other photographers doing ICM photography, but it's not just for landscape photographers. You can cover off any subject at all in ICM, so we'll debunk that one. It's just for amateurs who don't want to follow real technical photography, raw photography. And I hear this a lot from, dare I say, camera clubs who have had some feedback on their images, and they've said, well, you just dropped the camera, or did you really mean to make a blurry photo? Because it doesn't follow the technical rule of being sharp. And some people really struggle to get their head around that. So it's not just for amateurs who don't want to follow the rule book. Some of the best ICM photographers, the ones that are highest in their game, are doing this on such a professional level and selling their images. So it is not just for amateurs who want to throw the rule book out the window. One ICM image of a woodland is just the same as another. They look all the same. Now, I have heard this, and it absolutely horrified me when I read this. And that just shows a lack of awareness of what you can do with ICM photography or what it's all about. So I do not believe that one person's ICM image of anything, any subject, can be related to another. I think every single person's ICM images are very unique. You don't need any technical skills to make ICM images. That's not the case at all. You need to understand exposure. You need to understand shutter speed. You need to understand depth of field. You need to understand the use of filters. You need to understand composition, exposure. You need to understand everything. So you need so many technical skills to be able to make ICM images. You do not just wave your camera about. Anybody that's tried ICM will know that is not the case. It takes a lot of skill. And even if you wave your camera about in one direction one time, trying to replicate that image the following time is pretty impossible. And the last one, my son or daughter could have made that. I've been into the Tate Modern, and I've said that about paintings there, I must admit, or installations, let's say. And a lot of people say that about ICM as well, because they are just a little bit ill-informed about what actually goes into making these images. So those are just some things I've heard, and I'd just like to hope that if you've heard any of these, that you will maybe be smiling with me and going, yes, I get this. If you're new to ICM, hopefully this will just give you a feeling of how I feel about I feel very passionate about ICM photography, and I believe it's quite a technical skill to carry on. A little bit of background, if you're not familiar with ICM, you do need to make the following choices. As we said, it's not just a case of waving your camera about. You need to make choices regarding the shutter speed you use, the direction you move the camera, the type of movement you make, how fast or where you move, how fast you move or how smoothly you move, and when you press the shutter during the making of the image. So you actually need to consider all 5 of these things when you make every single image. Just to show you a little bit on shutter speed and also sort of technique, these are 2 images here. The one on the left is a traditional ICM movement upwards at 1 second. The one on the right was actually on the camera on a tripod, 20 seconds, moving the camera and putting it back and moving it and putting it back and just sort of stamping the camera. But all within 1 shutter speed, 1 shutter. This is not a multiple exposure. It's just moving the camera in a certain way. And that's for 20 seconds. So you can see there's a massive variation. This is exactly the same location, place, but it's a very, very different interpretation. Different movements. I went out and photographed these especially for one of the courses that I run. And this is just to show you, stood in one place, how many different kind of images results you can get just by moving the camera slightly differently. You've got everything from almost sharp to completely blurred to textual images to twisting of the lens. You've got a whole load of things. So you can just see that's just one small example, nothing flash location, but this is just playing and exploring with moving the camera differently. These are 2 images that I made about 6 years apart. So on the left, you have one of my first images, and on the right, you have an image I made last year in Norfolk. And just to show you where the techniques come over 6 years. On the left, I have a fast sweep from left to right with the camera. The aim was to get straight lines. It was to create like barcodes of color and to create a unique abstract color and lines. It was a 1/4 of a second, made in the midday sun. I like it. It's colorful. It's beautiful. But we'll compare it to the one on the right. This was actually made to not replicate a location, but it was made to replicate a feeling of calm and of the wave movement. So it was all about capturing the softness of the sunset meeting the waves, using a soft and contemplative sweeping of the camera in a helix position. So sort of a long drawn out figure of 8 movement here to cross the lines over each other and smooth it out. And this was 4 seconds made at sunset. Just when you press the shutter. So both of these images were made at the same shutter speed, 2 seconds. On the left, I pressed the camera and then I moved the, I pressed the shutter and then I moved the camera. And the one on the right, I moved the camera, pressed the shutter and kept moving. And what you end up doing, if you press the shutter after you start moving, you end up with a very smooth image. You don't end up with a start point or an end point within your image. Sometimes it can work. I find you lose a little bit of control. So you just need to maybe try the movement a few times to make sure you're starting and ending in the right place if you try that technique. Another style, which is whether you continue to move through the whole image or whether you stop and start within a shutter press. So on the left, the image is a 4-second constant movement of my bunch of tulips. And on the right, you have 13 seconds where I moved, I stopped, I moved, I stopped, I moved, I stopped. And I repeated that twice. So you get this movement of the tulips that almost looks like stamping, whereas the one on the left looks like very sort of fluid movement. Another thing you can do is the amount of time you can actually hold your camera still within an ICM image as well. So both of these were shut at 6 seconds, and on the left you have still for 5 seconds and 1 second of movement. So if you have to look quite carefully, but you can actually see there's a very slight softening just around these flowers. On the right, I held it slightly shorter time, so for 3 seconds and 2 seconds of movement. So you're almost half and half movement as still, and you can see there's an awful lot more softness and a lot more movement in the right-hand image. So some basics if this is completely new to you. Starting point, think about somewhere between 1/4 and half a second. That's a great place to start with your shutter speed. That's for me personally. I think it gives you enough time to get a feel for whether it's too fast or too slow for you. Put your ISO on your camera as low as possible, your f-stop as high as possible. You might need to use filters if necessary. I use a 6-stop or I use a polarizing filter. Tripod is optional. For me, it depends on shutter speed. Once I move up about above 3 seconds, I tend to use a tripod. Any camera or phone that has the ability to alter shutter speed can be used. Remember to turn off your image stabilization in your camera and your lens, because otherwise it's going to fight. And some basics: follow the lines. So if you're working with trees, ideally up and down is a good one. If you're working with landscapes, left and right, but generally follow the lines within it. So if the lines are flowing, don't try and move sort of straight on them. Paths, water, again, follow the lines within the image. I ask myself what I want the ICM technique to bring to an image that I am making. And I do this with all my photography, but I find it especially helps with the ICM photography. And I ask myself what made me pick my camera up to start with. And I find this is a really good way of figuring out the kind of movement and what I want the ICM to bring to the image. And I look to see if it's the color, whether there's some movement in the image, whether there's a contrast point, whether it's the lines, whether it's a feeling or an emotion that I've got from the location. And that kind of all gives me an idea of how to portray that into my ICM photography. So then I try to match this with the movements I use in the ICM image. I find if you miss this section out about trying to figure out what you want the ICM technique to bring, I find that you can make great ICM images, but they have no purpose. So they might mean something to you, but when you're trying to translate them to somebody else's interest, there's no connection. And I find that if you can put something about why you've stopped to make the image to start with, your images will be stronger without doubt. So now you've got an idea of how to actually make an ICM image. There's so many other elements to consider that you can bring to your image to elevate it and make it more compelling for others to look at and enjoy. So for those who enter ICM images in Image in the Month, or any competitions, as I said, I did this for the Guild of Photographers, this presentation, and they have a monthly competition. But for anybody that's putting images to camera clubs, online competitions, these things that I'm going to cover now are really key to elevating your images. Equally, if you're just doing it for your own and you want to try and figure out how to create ICM images that are slightly stronger, then hopefully you can follow some of these tips and suggestions. So I'm going to start with just a starter thing. What comes to mind when you see this image? Okay, so think about any feelings, any colours, any movements, any techniques. What actually comes to mind? So I've created a list of things that I hope come to mind, or hopefully you can, when you see my list, you go, oh yeah, of course. So I have balance within the image. I have point of focus, or I have several points of focus, which is these set of trees in the front. It's well exposed. There's no blown highlights. There's no shadows. There's no darks that are too dark. It's got depth from front all the way to the back of this image. It's got lovely colour, and that's why I made the image to start with, because of the colour. There's light. There's movement, and I put some movement with the ICM image into this. It looks like a painting to me, or pastel drawing, which I really, really like. It's very soft, okay, versus a harsh reality image. It's warm, the colours are warm, the feeling is kind of soft and gentle versus harsh and representative. There's movement. I've got it twice, so there's lots of movement. I have a feeling of being stood there with the composition that I've created. I'm kind of in the scene and I'm hearing the leaves rustling, and I get a feeling of being stood there. So those are just things that I hope you managed to get from that image. Just looking at this is a traditional image versus an ICM image. And I do this quite a lot. I make one image which is sharp, and then I create the ICM image, or I create the ICM image and think, oh, I'll make the sharp image one way or the other. But you'll see that in both of them, there's a good composition, there's light, there's a good exposure, there's good balance, there's focus point. But in the ICM, you have a little bit of creativity. You have a little bit of me in it. You've got some movement, you've got some energy, and you've got my take on this image. I quite like both of these, to be honest. I got lucky with the mist and the light. It was just really beautiful. But it's just to show that two images, like there's not a right or a wrong image, they're just two very different interpretations of the location. And certainly the one on the right is much more unique than the one on the left, which anybody who's set up in the same location with the same settings could have made. With ICM, the movement you make can interpret the scene in many different ways. So depending on what you're feeling or you're seeing, you can add complexity, or you can simplify it, or you can add a feeling. So this is just a location, a beautiful image. And what caught my eye was the silver birches. I absolutely love silver birches, but I also love the yellow. I love the light. There was a little bit of blue in the sky. I just loved all the different textures as well. There was lots of sort of little bit branches in the background, and then you've got these really strong silver birch trees in the foreground. So these are just a few different images, just to show you how standing in one place, just using different movements, you can bring a very different feeling to the images. And I like all of these that I'm going to show you. They're just three, I think, different interpretations. I love this one. It kind of reminds me of fireworks. I love the simplicity of it, but I also love how you've just got a little bit of texture still going on in this bottom area. It's very much color, lines, light. I love the blue, the yellow. There's a lot going on, but it's really, really nice to look at. This one I moved the camera very differently. I wanted to try and replicate or capture the silver birch detail. And so this isn't as strong as the last image, but it does capture a different feeling. It captures, you now look at these sort of the tree trunks, and they've almost been created in a 3D with the little movement that I've done with a sort of little loop of the camera. Certainly not as strong as the last one, but it sort of evokes a different feeling. This one here is very dynamic compared to the other two. This one, I started moving the camera and then pressed the shutter speed. So you end up with these really kind of dynamic lines. This is all about these straight lines, the color and the light. I probably like this one and the first one a similar amount, but again, three very different images. You saw where the location was to start with in the first picture, just because I moved the camera very, very slightly differently, and they were all on the same shutter speed. It was just the way that I moved the camera differently. Contrasts are really important in ICM photography, okay? The more contrasts you have, the stronger your image. Without contrast, your image will be a bit flat. There will be nowhere for your viewer to look at in particular. So in here, again, I've got your before photo on the left up here. And again, I noticed all the different textures, colors, light, and structures. And these are two different images I made. One, I zoomed in a little bit, just because I suddenly noticed when I've made this, I loved the light of the white coming through, balancing the white and the straight lines with the softness and the color on the right-hand side. This one, I wanted to keep the sky in, because actually the sky was quite nice on that day. These are images that I made, and actually, you know, on a traditional non-ICM image, you might have completely disregarded them because they're quite busy images, but ICM kind of simplifies images as long as you've got contrast. And in both of these, the contrast was the silver birch trees. Against one on the right, it was the strong silver birches against the soft grass landscape and the darker background. And I loved on this one, I like the black trees with the silver birches here. Again, they're both quite busy, but they both interpreted the location as I liked it. And had I not had any contrast in these images, they would have been really quite flat. I love color contrast. This one, if you turn this one on the right black and white, there would actually be virtually no contrast in it. But because it's in colour, you get to see the greens, the oranges, the whites, the blues. You can see on the left, it's a melee of it's really deep of green and white. But what struck me was the green and the white. And so when I made the image, this was another one where I moved the camera before I pressed the shutter speed and before I pressed the shutter. because I really wanted to accentuate the contrasts of the white and the green. It wasn't particularly about the texture, it wasn't particularly about the subject location, anything like that. It was about colour. That's what I really wanted to bring to this. And so this is where it really helps if you figure out what you've noticed to start with. Light can play a really big part in ICM. Now, you can make ICM images in the rain, no problem. In the sun, in the mist, it doesn't matter. As long as you're using other contrasts, if you don't have any directional light or sunlight. But directional or sunlight can accentuate shapes and repetition. And this is a really good example. I stood here and watched this one come in and out of the shade. The sun was going in and out. And when the sun went in, literally this was completely flat, but the minute the sun hit these silver birches, I had the contrast point within the image that I was looking at. Same with these silver birches in front of the dark fir woodland. Oh, they were just a dream. It was all about the contrast between the light and the dark behind it on these images here. One location, infinite opportunities. When you start to study the movement, you can find interesting elements that catches your eye, and don't be scared to just like explore the whole location. When I stood here, what actually drew my mind, I just loved the colour of the water that was coming over the edge of the waterfall. But just to show you, these are 6 images that I made by zooming in. I didn't really want the whole waterfall, to be honest, because that wasn't what captured me. In fact, if I had found it a little bit green and a little bit wide and a little bit too much going on to capture the whole thing. So what I did was I zoomed in on the point in the waterfall where there was a change in contrast. So the change in contrast was the speed of the water and the direction of the water. And as a result, you get different colours, different textures, different light, just playing with these, all following the waterfall downwards over on its little journey. But again, you can see various different compositions, all sort of really capturing the location that I saw. This was another part of the waterfall, and what I absolutely loved, this was just like a bit of waterfall that was just really very busy, and I zoomed in on this one here because it was just down a bit of a ravine, and on either side there was just nothing going on. But what I noticed was the colour in the water. So that image was all about the colour in the water. This one was all about the way the water was tumbling down between the rocks. I enjoyed capturing, again, thinking about what you're trying to make of the image. Water doesn't have to be moving fast to be able to enjoy it. Again, 2 on the left here are actually straight images, they're reflections, and then I moved the camera. In this one, I actually moved the camera left to right across the reflection, so I actually just sort of wiggled it and just softened it. This one here, I followed the lines because I felt these lines were quite strong, so I actually moved the camera down these lines, which is why I've accentuated how straight and how sharp they are. So again, just using different movements according to the feeling you're getting or what you're seeing. You do not need to photograph amazing things with ICM. Something as simple as the grass in the verge as I walk my dog, I can make beautiful. Well, I think it's beautiful. I followed this up with a project on grass in the verges of my road for the whole spring and summer last year, and I made a body of work of over 50 images. But this is how it started. I just noticed, I went out one day to photograph the cow parsley, just because it was almost over for the year, and I ended up photographing the buttercups, the cow parsley, the grass, and then I just started playing with light and texture. And this kind of carried on through the whole year because I just realised how beautiful something so simple could be. And I bet everybody just walks straight past it and never notices it. I took in grasses. I did a little bit of, this was a barley field that was next to the verge, so I kind of merged it in with the verges. But again, it's finding a focus point within the location. So all of these, they're a great big barley field, but what I've done is I've looked for a point to focus on, because ICM, you still have to focus on a subject within your image. You can't just have a blurry image to start with. You do need something to be focused and sharp on. And in all of these, I picked a piece of grass or a piece of barley that caught my attention because it was slightly different. This one here, the light was on it. These ones, they were sticking up above. These ones were bits of grass above the barley. So just looking for the different contrasts to pick up on. And this is some, not all, of the resulting project that I did last year. And you can see I ended up going with colour, texture, light. I had an absolute ball doing this. I need to do something with it, like a book or an exhibition or something. But it's all sat there waiting. I'm really, really enjoying it. And now they've flattened it and it's all mud and it's brown out there. So I'm so happy that I have these images to remember the beautiful verges by last year. Again, another subject matter. Reflections are constantly moving and offer a great opportunity to experiment with the ICM and the movement you add. Okay, so this is a sharp image. This is any movement that you see here is just purely from the movement of the water. And if you watch reflections for even like 10 seconds, you will see they do not stop for a second in the movement. So even if you just fired off 10 images, one after another, every single image would be different, which is really lovely if you want to kind of build up a little set of images quite easily. These were the resulting ICM images. What did I want to do? I wanted to create this kind of feeling of the softness. Yes, they were quite sharp images on the water, but I wanted to try and show the fact that they were moving and morphing the whole time. And so I just moved my camera very gently with the dancing of the images. And you can see these two here are almost exactly the same, but because the movement is different, you get different results. This one I zoomed out a little bit, and this one I zoomed in, just focusing on the black line and the water and the white. And I just love how where the light reflects, you get these different shapes. It almost looks like smoke or underwater photography. Any of you who have tried ICM photography, maybe you've tried animal ICM, and I put this in because I think it's really important to show you where I've come from sometimes. Animal ICM is not easy, okay? By all means, go and have a practice, go and have a play. But with a bit of patience and determination and practice and inspiration, you can go and you can get some lovely images. But again, this is a really good example of the fact that ICM, like any other technique, fruition comes when you practice and you have the determination. So I call these my pancake ducks from 6 years ago. This is one of my first ever attempts at ICM animals. And yeah, I'm telling you they're ducks because you probably wouldn't know otherwise. But I went from capturing this to the phenomenon of the geese migration that was happening when I made this presentation. And I shot these literally as I was about to go and make the presentation. And the geese were migrating across the fields next door to my house. So I'm just going to play you this little video so you can just see what I was seeing from basically from my garden. What you don't get is a feeling of the sound, and I apologise for the video. The videography doesn't always come out great, but basically there was a melee. I call it a melee, just a cacophony of birds in the sky. The noise was amazing, and they'd come through every dawn and dusk basically, and just land on the fields around me. And I just wanted to capture the sky being full of these birds, and also when they take off and when they come and land. It's mostly when they take off, and literally you've got thousands of birds going into the air at once. I wanted to try and capture this. So the next few images were my attempt, and you'll see that they've come on quite a way from the pancake ducks. So this was actually standing in the field. This is all geese down the bottom here that haven't taken off, but I just caught these birds just taking off to start with. Then a few more took off, and I sort of zoomed in a little bit to get this feeling of them all coming past me on the field there. This was some more up in the sky. Again, just like lots and lots of people see murmurations of starlings. This was kind of almost like a murmuration of geese, apart from they don't sort of flock around, they just go up and fly off. But the sky is as full. And this was them almost all just having got off the floor. So you can see from those few birds at the start to this at the end. I just love this, and the fact that they've got a little bit of white on them. And as I said, it was at sunset and sunrise that I was photographing these birds. And I went out 3 or 4 times over the space of about a week, because they were just right next door to my house, and I just walked around the fields locally. Something very different, just to show you, going from birds to fish. This was when I was actually on holiday out in Greece last year, and I just loved all these fish. And I thought, I quite like the sharp image, but what happens if I do ICM? And I had to be very, very small movements, very, very fast shutter speed. This was like about 1/4 of a second, 1/6 of a second, because fish move quite fast, just the same as birds. Those birds ones, just so you know, they were shot at between 1/6 of a second and 1/4 of a second. So quite a fast shutter speed, and a very small movement as well, in line with the birds. These ones, I kind of moved the camera very towards me, because the fish were mostly heading in the direction towards me. I quite like it, just to illustrate various different animals. So being creative and unique with the way you record and document and portray images can give a unique perspective. And I just wanted to show you how ICM could be used to put some more feeling or emotion into something that's could be quite a straightforward set of images, but in the way that I interpreted it, gave it a little bit more meaning. So in Corfu last year on holiday, we experienced the wildfires. On a hillside high on the mountain, I experienced firsthand being evacuated in the middle of the night as the fires burned out of control across the hill above our villas. When we left at midnight, we actually had no idea if our house would be there for us to come back to the next day. That's how sort of borderline it was about whether the fires would come down. They actually did a brilliant job of managing them. Very few people lost their homes over the time that the fires burned. But over the next 3 days, I documented my experience of the fires using ICM to create the veil of smoke that enveloped the island. So it felt a little bit wrong to start with, because I wasn't sure whether I should be being creative with a disaster that was going on. But in the end, I decided that I did want to capture it, but I didn't want to just take snapshots. So I wanted to try and put some of me into what I was seeing. So if you want to go and see, this is just a few of the pictures. If you want to go and see the full series, there is a blog post, and it was also published in the ICM photo magazine. This is just to show you 2 straight images. So we had the helicopters going over day and night, well, day mostly, into the evenings and first thing in the morning for about 3-4 days solid, trying to put these fires out. These are images all made literally, apart from a couple of sunrise, they were all made from within about 10 meters of where we were staying. And the smoke was just coming off these mountains, and you'll see the colors as well. But this is just some sharp images to give you a feeling of what I was looking at. So this is where it started. One afternoon, I was stood out by the pool, and my son said to me, "Mum, the sky looks a bit different." And we went outside and suddenly realised that these could not possibly just be clouds. This could not be smog or heat haze. There must be something else going on. And this was just a view across the pool with the start of the smoke. And this was sort of about 4 o'clock one afternoon. By 11 o'clock that evening, this was the view. What you're seeing here is the top of my villa. I was just stood down on the pool, and this is the top of the villa, and this is the mountain. There is no post-production with colour related to this. This is exactly what I saw. The fire was burning on the hillside above, and this was the colour. And so I made an image. I literally made 5 images as we were packing up and leaving to go, just because I thought this is something I have to record. But you can see the colour and the intensity, and you can almost feel the heat coming off the top here. We stayed in the car overnight, and we stayed down by the lake, an inland lake. And this is what we woke up to the next morning. There was a hope that maybe they'd sorted out the fires, and maybe it was just something had happened overnight and it would all be okay. But this was the haze that greeted us. It was an absolute beautiful sunrise, and it kind of felt a little bit wrong that we were experiencing such a beautiful sunrise. But I captured this across the lake in the morning. We then went back eventually to our accommodation in the afternoon. It was okay, but then I was on high alert for the next 3 days. Basically, the airplanes and the helicopters circled over above, taking water out from the sea in front of us and putting it on the fires. And these are images that I created showing the sort of smog. The burning above the mountain had disappeared after that first horrific night. But the island was on high alert where we were. The smog, the fires were still burning. It wasn't that they were under control. They were still burning very out of control, just not right above where my house was. This is looking back. This is looking back to the same area that you saw in those first couple of sharp photos. This is actually a multiple exposure to combine the sharpness of the masts in the background with the smoke and the fire. And there was this sort of very eerie feeling. Again, this is a multiple exposure to try and put a little bit of the landscape, but also a little bit of the feeling of the ICM in there. Towards the end, they had to try and decide where they were going to work with the fire, and some places were just left to burn out of control. And this was on a mountain on the other side of the valley, again viewed from about 5 meters from my house, but this was far enough away in a different direction that it wasn't bothering us, apart from obviously the smoke and the concern for everybody else. But it wasn't coming down towards where we were staying. This is again a multiple exposure. When I tried, this line of fire was coming across the mountain. Now, when you move it a point of light with your ICM, it actually just creates lines. So what you're seeing here, this is the ICM image, and then this is the sharp image. And I combined the two to try and give the feeling of the movement of the fire going across the hill. This here again, this was again a multiple exposure. These are points of fire. And I moved the camera quite big this time. And then this is just to show how close the fire was to the buildings on the other side of the mountain. So again, just using the ICM movement to put a bit of an emotion into it. So moving from that, you go from something quite dramatic to something as simple and quite clearly not very beautiful, unless you see beauty in a unique way. And this is a maize field in just where I live. And this is just to show you do not need to go anywhere amazing to make ICM photos that are beautiful. I've passed maize fields. I absolutely love the colour. If you go back into this image here, you'll see there's beautiful reds, there's yellows, there's greens, there's some super texture coming through here. And I thought, you know, this year, I always say I'm going to do it, and then they cut the maize and it's too late. So this year I went out deliberately and I wandered in the maize and made some ICM photos. So basically I was looking for colour contrast, lines, and I just played and experimented with, it was all about the colour and the lines and the light on these. I continue to love experimenting about how I move the camera. And in this image, I played a little bit with holding the camera still and then moving it. So you get a little bit of a sharp element to the image, and then you get a movement in within the image. So it's a balance between how long you hold it still and how long you move the image for. Just another little way I use ICM, you can be inspired by an amazing painter, and I absolutely love this image by Van Gogh. And I wanted to replicate the feeling of impressionism, but in a photo. And I felt that ICM is a great representation of the impressionism art. And interestingly, I made the photo before I saw the artwork. So, and when I saw the artwork, I was like, oh my goodness me, I made this photo in the summer without even, I'd seen this picture, but it wasn't till I saw it in a gallery a month or so after I'd actually made the image that I put 2 and 2 together about where I maybe got the inspiration. And this was an olive grove when we were out in Corfu, and I just loved, I went out early one morning when the light was just coming through, and I just really enjoyed playing with creating a feeling of the olive groves. Away from trees and natural elements, that's where I feel most comfortable, but I do love a change and a challenge. So there's a little bit of architecture, street photography offers great opportunities. You can put your own stamp on a location. You can add a feeling of being, whether it's busy or what it's being used for. When you visit places on holiday, you can create something beautiful and unique, and you can use it from the oldest to the newest architecture and find some beauty. This is one of the buildings on the Jubilee campus in Nottingham at the university, and it, for all intents and purposes, it was a grey day. This is just a window, but this is what I created from it. I saw the lines and I saw the contrast between the blues and the yellows, and that's what I wanted to accentuate. For both of these images, I moved the camera and pressed the shutter after I started moving the camera, and I moved it very, very straight. Instead of sweeping upwards, which kind of create a bow when you make the image, I actually held the camera and moved straight up in front of me to keep the dead straight lines. And then I cropped in to make this really abstract, and this just captures a little bit of the roof as well. This was a church, cathedral that we went into, and again, beautiful stained glass windows, a real challenge because it's so dark and the windows are so light in comparison. And I just played with the ICM. It was all about the colour on this one. I just wanted to try and capture this absolute gorgeousness of colour, and I felt that the ICM images said more to me about the sort of the textures and the beauty of it than the other image. I quite like this one, but I really, really like the ICM images. Something quite different. This is Utrecht Station. This is one I made quite a while ago. I don't go into the city very often. And this was I made because I love the lines. Okay, so we've got some beautiful bent lines, but I also, and the shadow that was coming out here, I stood and I created the image with this composition that allowed this beautiful line to run through the middle. Very small movement upwards. The people were moving, which is why you get the moving. It was about 1/4 of a second, nothing, not a very long shutter speed, but it was about the way that the place is being used. So these people are moving to and from the station. And I used the black and white to try and minimise any distractions. This again is just how the area is being used around the station, the people travelling through the area. This was in Paris in the rain. I just love the umbrellas. Again, you know, you can put your own stamp on it. It was a day in the rain. So, you know, a straight image here would have done absolutely nothing. It would have just been a very dull, boring photo. But with a little bit of ICM movement, I captured this beautiful museum with the movement of the people across the bridge in the front of it. I started with that image and then I ran with a little project during the day. Again, these are all with my iPhone that I made with the slow shutter cam app. And I just started capturing all the umbrellas that were going around because it was pouring with rain. You got these super reflections on the tarmac that I really enjoyed capturing. Finished with this image of the pyramid here, the museum, and I really enjoyed that. So ICM is way more than just shaking your camera. So next time you see an ICM image and dismiss it as easy or a technique anyone can do, hopefully I've opened your eyes. Hopefully you're a little bit more educated on things that you could possibly do to make your ICM images a little bit more interesting. And if you're already making ICM images, I hope this presentation's given you some key areas to focus on to ensure your images are more compelling to others who view them. If you'd like to keep in touch or go and have a look at my website, it's charlottebellamy.com. If you'd like to get in touch by email for any reason, charlotte@charlottebellamy.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Charlotte Bellamy Holland, and my YouTube, you've already found it here, Charlotte Bellamy Creative Photography. I regularly run online courses. I also have some in-person workshops. I have one going on in Norfolk in May, and I've got one place left in Scotland at the moment at the beginning of April, and also the Tulip Tour with Light and Land at the end of April is still available as well. The online courses are all up to date on my website as well. I also offer some mentoring if you'd like one-to-one. It'd be lovely to keep in touch with you. Do get in touch if you have any questions at all or make any comments, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you again online soon. Many thanks.